They say the empath is soft, too emotional, too dramatic, too much. They're wrong. The empath is not weak. They are not fragile. They are not broken. They are silent because they are studying. You think you've gotten away with it? The manipulation, the lies, the little digs hidden in praise, the gaslight woven into charm. You think the empath didn't notice. They noticed everything, and they said nothing, until now. Carl Jung documented a transformation so unsettling that he called it the most terrifying psychological awakening in human nature. A pattern he observed not once, but again and again, in individuals who had spent their entire lives being kind, compliant, invisible, absorbing the pain of others, excusing betrayal, rationalizing cruelty, and then one day, they stopped. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with clarity. Jung watched these empaths evolve from emotional shock absorbers into something else entirely, something he called psychologically complete. They no longer sought approval. They no longer questioned their instincts. They didn't confront with fire. They dismantled illusion with surgical calm. The narcissist never saw it coming. They were expecting chaos, drama, breakdown. What they got instead was precision, because the empath doesn't explode. They wake up, and when they do, the entire dynamic flips. You see, empaths don't just feel, they analyze. Every betrayal, logged, every micro-expression, noted, every contradiction, stored with mathematical clarity. They've been building the case in silence, and when the clarity event hits, that final betrayal, that final lie, it all comes into focus. What was once breakdown becomes breakthrough. What was once victim becomes seer. What was once too sensitive becomes dangerously accurate. Jung knew this moment wasn't just personal, it was archetypal, alchemical, a death and rebirth encoded in the deepest corridors of the psyche, a psychic crucifixion followed by resurrection, not into the old self, but into the awakened empath. The kindest person in the room just became the most powerful. And now the rules have changed. This is the story of what happens when the empath survives, when they absorb the narcissist's darkness and live to tell the truth. This isn't healing. This is transmutation. This isn't empowerment. This is individuation. And if you're still watching, it means you felt it too. That shift inside your bones. That moment you stopped apologizing for seeing too much. You're not crazy. You were never broken. You were evolving. And now the only question left is, who do you become after everything you thought you were dies? To understand what the empath becomes, you have to first understand what they were built for. An empath is not simply someone who feels deeply. That's the surface. Beneath that is a survival system so ancient, so precise, that Jung believed it formed in childhood as a response to environments that were emotionally unstable, even dangerous. The empath doesn't just sense feelings. They monitor entire emotional ecosystems. From the moment they could speak, they were attuned to shifts in tone, micro movements in faces, unsaid tensions between adults. Why? Because their nervous system learned safety depends on knowing what others refuse to say. This is not sensitivity. This is data collection at a level most people can't comprehend. Jung saw these individuals as containers for the collective shadow, the emotional garbage bins for families, partners, and communities who were too fragile to face their own shame, rage, or guilt. So they dumped it on the empath. And the empath, they carried it. Silently, skillfully, until they started to believe it was their own. They internalized pain that never belonged to them. They blamed themselves for the rage of narcissistic parents. They tried to earn love from partners who used affection as bait. They became everything for everyone and nothing to themselves. And society rewarded them for it, called them selfless, kind, loyal. But behind that loyalty was hypervigilance. Behind that kindness was fear, because to lose connection meant danger. So the empath learned to betray their own instincts to maintain peace. They saw the lie but stayed silent. They felt the manipulation but gave more. They noticed the mask but smiled back. And over time, they began to forget the sound of their own voice. This is the tragic genius of the early empath. They become masters of emotional survival, but amnesiacs of their own truth, until the pattern repeats one too many times, until the betrayal comes from someone they trusted most, until the projection collapses and the empath sees not just the narcissist, but themselves. Not the version trained to please. Not the mask of the good one, but the seer, the strategist, the one who was never weak, but was waiting. And once they see it, they can't unsee it. And once they remember, they don't forget again. This is where the shift begins. The empath is no longer just absorbing energy. They're reading patterns, predicting behavior, and choosing where their compassion flows. They are no longer available for abuse, not because they've become cold, but because they've become clear. And in that clarity, Jung saw the birth of something unstoppable. It always starts the same way. The narcissist doesn't come in wearing a mask of evil. They come cloaked in everything the empath's wounded heart has ever longed for. They mirror your light, echo your dreams, admire your insight. It feels like resonance, like safety, like home. But it isn't home. It's the trap. In Jungian psychology, the narcissist and the empath are not random matches. They are archetypes, magnetized by unconscious patterns as old as mythology itself. The narcissist is the embodiment of an integrated shadow. Their entire identity rests on a fragile false self, grandiose, inflated, untouchable. But underneath, a terrified psyche that will do anything to avoid shame, even if it means feeding on someone else's soul. Enter the empath, the perfect vessel. The empath, trained from childhood to absorb the unspoken, becomes the narcissist's emotional reservoir, the container for everything the narcissist disowns, their self-loathing, their fear, their shame, all of it dumped without apology into the empath's nervous system. And the empath, they take it in. They don't just love the narcissist, they attempt to redeem them. They mistake projection for intimacy, manipulation for vulnerability. They stay loyal through betrayal, rationalize the devaluation, excuse the erosion of their own boundaries. They call it love, but Jung would call it possession. The narcissist doesn't relate. They consume, not with knives or fists, but with confusion, with emotional reversal, with 1,000 tiny rewrites of reality that leave the empath asking the same question every night. Is it me? That's the genius of the narcissist mask. It's not sustained by power. It's sustained by the empath's doubt. And because the empath can feel everything, they can always feel the narcissist's pain. So they stay, they soothe, they try harder, until their own pain becomes background noise, until they don't recognize themselves in the mirror. And even then, they keep giving, because the tragedy of the empath is not that they didn't see the narcissist. It's that they saw the shadow and still believed they could carry it. They thought love could fix it. They thought loyalty could earn safety. They thought empathy meant sacrifice. But shadow can't be loved away. Projection can't be absorbed into peace. Jung knew this dance well. He warned, if you become a receptacle for someone else's unconscious, you will lose your own identity in the process. And that's exactly what begins to happen. The empath's light dims, their intuition dulls, their boundaries dissolve, and the mask across from them smiles. Because the narcissist doesn't love the empath. They love the way the empath makes them feel. And when that fuel runs dry, they discard, cold, calculated, without explanation, leaving the empath with a hollow heart and a mind full of gaslit memories. But it's in that emptiness, something else begins to rise. There is a moment, not loud, not dramatic, a quiet, private instant when the empath sees it. All of it, the pattern, the lie, the betrayal they've been avoiding for years. Jung called this the clarity event, the psychic rupture when the illusion finally collapses. It's not just the infidelity, or the secret account, or the cruel words behind the smile. It's the horrifying realization, I saw the signs and ignored them. The empath didn't miss the red flags. They silenced their own perception to preserve the illusion of love. They felt the gut twists, the emotional contradictions, the way their Intuition screamed every time they were blamed for someone else's sin. But they buried it. They made excuses. They took the blame. They tried harder, until trying harder meant dying slowly. And then, the moment hits, like a dream breaking open, like a mask shattering mid-performance. The betrayal is final. Not because it's new, but because the empath finally stops gaslighting themselves about it. This is the nigredo Jung spoke of, the blackening, the psychic rot, the ego crumbling into ash so the true self can begin to emerge. It's disorienting, sickening, rageful. The empath stares at the pieces of the story they were told and sees how carefully they were arranged to keep them small. They remember the banquet of love bombing, the wine turning to blood, the food to ash, the masked smiles at the table concealing teeth underneath. And they realize they were never loved. They were fed on. This is where the collapse happens, but not in the way the narcissist expects. The narcissist anticipates breakdown, begging, hysteria, dependence, but the empath doesn't scream. They go still. This stillness terrifies manipulators because it isn't numbness. It's data locking into place. It's pattern recognition, overwhelming hope. The empath stops needing to believe the best. They stop pleading to be chosen. They stop defending what's indefensible. And in that stillness, something ancient awakens. They remember the micro-expressions, the omissions, the way the narcissist's apologies never included real change. They don't need proof anymore. They already know. And knowing changes everything. This is the snap, not of chaos, but of clarity. The empath doesn't rage. They reveal. With clinical, terrifying accuracy, they speak what they've seen. The patterns, the lies, the timelines. They expose everything that was hidden, not with venom, but with precision. Like a surgeon removing diseased organs. No blame, no performance. Just truth. And the narcissist? They panic because the power dynamic is gone. The fuel source has been cut, and the empath is no longer trying to be chosen. They're choosing themselves. This is the moment Jung feared and revered, because it's the death of the old empath, the one who gave without boundaries, the one who mistook pain for purpose, and it's the rebirth of someone else entirely. Someone who doesn't carry what isn't theirs, someone who doesn't negotiate with mass, someone who has seen the abyss and built a home beyond it. This is where the story should end, right? The empath sees the betrayal. The narcissist is exposed. Game over. But this is only the beginning. Because what happens next is not a revenge arc, it's a rebirth. The empath, once a vessel for everyone else's pain, becomes a vessel for truth. Their nervous system, once flooded with projected guilt and shame, now becomes an instrument of perception so sharp it slices through illusion like a blade. And the snap? It doesn't look like what you think. The snap isn't a meltdown. It isn't chaos. It's clarity. Frightening clarity. It's the empath walking into the same room with the same people and no longer needing to pretend. It's their face going still while their eyes come alive. Because for the first time, the empath isn't feeling for others. They're feeling through them. They're not absorbing pain anymore. They're diagnosing it. And Jung saw this shift as the moment when the empath moves from being a carrier of collective shadow to a revealer of it. The room changes when they speak, not because they raise their voice, but because their words land with unbearable precision. They don't argue. They identify. They don't accuse. They observe with the emotional accuracy of a surgeon and the detachment of someone who no longer needs to be understood. Jung called it the moment of shadow integration under extreme duress, when a person's repressed strength fuses with their sensitivity and something terrifyingly complete is born. The empath doesn't need to destroy anyone. Their presence alone exposes what needs to be destroyed. Because here's what no one told the narcissist. While they were playing the long game of deception, the empath was recording everything, not in journals, in their psyche, patterns, behaviors, micro shifts, fluctuations, language loops, energy distortions. They may have looked broken. They weren't. They were studying, waiting, until the illusion cracked wide open and their intuition stopped needing permission. And once that permission is no longer outsourced, Once the empath fully trusts their own perception, they become immune to manipulation, not resistant, immune. Because the moment you stop needing to believe the best in others at the cost of betraying yourself, is the moment you become untouchable. The narcissist can't play the game anymore, not because the game changed, but because the empath left the board. This is what terrifies manipulators, not confrontation, not rage, but calm detachment. The empath doesn't need to win. They just need to see clearly. And in that seeing, there is no more hook, no more fuel, no more power imbalance. The mirror has turned, and the narcissist, they now see themselves reflected in it, raw, unmasked, unfiltered. Not because the empath sought revenge, but because they finally chose themselves. This is the awakening. Not to anger, not to bitterness, but to truth. And once that truth takes root, the empath is no longer a sponge. They're a storm. And storms don't ask for permission to change the atmosphere. They just arrive. Now comes the part Jung knew few would ever reach. Integration. The shadow is no longer something out there. It's not just in the narcissist. It's not just in the past. It's in the empath too. Because real healing doesn't mean disowning the dark. It means becoming aware of the ways you played into your own pain. Jung called it the path of individuation, the journey of uniting opposites within the self. Not to become perfect, but to become whole. The empath begins to ask the real questions. What part of me needed to be needed? What wound was I protecting by sacrificing myself? Where did I learn that love meant absorbing harm? And with every honest answer, a fracture heals, not with softness, but with strength. This is shadow work in its purest form. The empath sees their own unconscious tendencies, the desire to rescue, to fix, to earn worth through martyrdom, and instead of judging those parts, they reclaim them. They stop seeing themselves as victims of darkness. They see themselves as alchemists of it. Their intuition sharpens, but now it's paired with boundaries. Their love deepens, but now it's paired with discernment. They still care, but not for everyone, not blindly, not endlessly. Their empathy becomes selective, not as punishment, but as precision. This is what Jung meant when he wrote that true transformation is permanent. These empaths don't relapse into people-pleasing. They don't second-guess what they know. They don't explain their boundaries to people who never respected them. They're done performing, because once shadow's integrated, there's nothing left to hide and nothing left to chase. They're no longer trying to be the light in every room. They've become the whole spectrum, light and dark, sensitivity and strength, compassion and clarity. They are no longer afraid of confrontation because they no longer abandon themselves to avoid it. They are no longer afraid of being misunderstood because they finally understand themselves. And that is what Jung called psychological completion. This is not a glow-up. This is not self-help fluff dressed in spiritual language. This is the death and rebirth of an archetype. The empath doesn't just change, they become. They become something Jung didn't just observe, he feared. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was real power. And most of the world isn't ready for people who can't be manipulated. Because after integration comes something far more powerful than healing: sovereignty. The empath steps fully into what Jung would call the individuated self, the union of the wounded child, the loving adult, and the shadow that was never evil, only repressed. And now, they walk differently. They speak differently. They think strategically. This is where kindness grows a backbone, where love meets limits, where compassion learns to say no. The empath is no longer a sponge. They are a psychological architect. They don't absorb dysfunctional systems anymore. They redesign them. They become selective. Not cold, not closed, selective. Who they allow into their life is no longer based on need or pity. It's based on resonance, truth, integrity. And here's where the shift becomes uncanny. The same empath who used to doubt their own reality can now detect deception within seconds. Their nervous system, once hijacked by trauma, is now a pattern recognition machine, calibrated to human behavior, tuned to psychological distortion. They become what Jung called a truth detector. They don't just sense when someone's lying, they know why. They know where that lie comes from, and they know whether it's worth confronting or walking away from. Because the awakened empath is not here to fix anyone anymore. They're here to choose, and their presence alone carries weight. They no longer need to expose others. Their calm, rooted energy does it for them. They don't retaliate. They remove, quietly, cleanly, without warning or apology. This is the strategist's war room that Jung described hidden beneath the empath's softness. It was never rage. It was always discernment waiting for clarity. And now, clarity is constant. They don't need external validation. They trust their own eyes, their own gut, their own memory. They are immune to gaslighting, not because they've armored themselves, but because they've integrated the very parts of themselves that used to be exploited. What once made them too sensitive now makes them psychologically invincible. And this power? It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's still. Still but undeniable, because nothing shakes the room like a person who no longer seeks to be chosen, only to be true. This is not the empath who entered the fire. This is the phoenix who built wings in it. You want to know what scares manipulators the most? It's not confrontation, it's presence. The empath, once walked over, now walks into a room, and without saying a word, the air changes. People who used to exploit them, they can feel it. Jung called it the predator's instinct, a deep, unconscious sense in manipulative personalities that something shifted. They don't know what. They can't explain it. But suddenly, their usual tricks don't land. Their hooks don't stick. Their charm doesn't disarm, because the empath isn't participating anymore. And predators? They sense it immediately. They start backing up, deflecting, defending. Some even turn hostile. Because when someone sees you completely and wants nothing from you, your mask becomes unbearable. The awakened empath becomes a mirror. They don't need to judge. They don't need to expose. They just exist. And in doing so, they reflect back the hidden, unspoken, unhealed parts of everyone they meet. To the inauthentic, it's intolerable. But to the hurting, it's healing. Because the empath's new frequency liberates others. Those still trapped in toxic dynamics begin to wake up. Not because the empath told them to, but because for the first time, they've witnessed someone who got out and became whole. And suddenly they believe they can too. This is the mirror effect. This is the empath as oracle. Not a savior, not a martyr, but a living example that transformation is possible and inevitable. Not because they were rescued, but because they rescued themselves. Here's the part Jung never published. The part he wrote in scattered notes, locked away in private journals. The part that kept him awake at night. Because what he witnessed wasn't just the healing of empathic individuals. It was the emergence of a psychological force so precise, so potent, that in the wrong hands it could be weaponized. You see, when an empath integrates their shadow and survives the abyss, they gain something terrifying, power without dependence. And that kind of power can go either way. They could easily destroy the people who hurt them. They could outmaneuver every manipulator. They could mirror the narcissist's tactics, but with triple the insight and none of the delusion. But here's what separated Jung's transformed empaths from monsters in disguise. They chose not to. That's the ethical line. Because shadow integration without ethics doesn't create awakening. It creates another narcissist with sharper tools. And the temptation is real. To shut down instead of refine, to harden instead of illuminate, to say, never again will I feel, and call that protection. But numbness is not mastery, it's unfinished alchemy. Jung knew, the empath who becomes gold must first refuse to become stone. That's the paradox. You carry fire now, but you don't burn indiscriminately. You can see through people, but you don't use that to manipulate. You could dominate, but instead you choose to discern. This is what makes the awakened empath rare. Not just that they survived, but that they didn't become what hurt them. They integrated it, studied it, transformed it, and emerged with something the narcissist will never have: ethical self-possession. This is why Jung called them not just healed, but complete. So now you know. The empath's journey doesn't end in victimhood, it ends in sovereignty. Not the kind that screams, not the kind that performs, but the kind that walks into the room with no mask, no agenda, and no need to be understood. Because when you trust your perception completely, when you no longer apologize for seeing what you see, you become something the narcissist cannot control, cannot fake, and cannot stand next to without flinching. You become free, and freedom, for the empath, is not escape. It's embodiment. You don't need to rescue anyone anymore. You don't need to be the emotional shock absorber for broken families, chaotic partners, or manipulative friendships. You don't need to earn love by disappearing. That was the old you, the one conditioned to betray your instincts in order to survive. But that self, she died in the fire. And what rose from those ashes is not fragile. It's not even fierce. It's clear. You now love with discernment. You give with direction. You sense dysfunction from miles away. And you don't try to fix it anymore. You just step aside and keep walking because you know your worth. You know your power. And you know your gift isn't being everything for everyone. It's being fully yourself, for you. The awakened empath doesn't announce their strength. Others feel it in their bones. The ones still wearing masks, they fumble. The ones still living in performance, they panic. But the ones who are ready, they recognize you. They see the fire in your eyes. They feel the steadiness in your voice. And they realize if you made it out, maybe they can too. This is your real impact. You don't need to shout your truth. You embody it. You don't need to fix the broken. You model wholeness. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. You're not here to persuade. You're here to exist so fully, so consciously, that you give others permission to awaken just by being in your presence. So if you've ever been called too sensitive, too intense, too much, here's the truth. You were never too much. They were too asleep. And now, you're awake. You're whole. And you are no longer asking for love. You are choosing where it flows. This is what it means to be an empath who has integrated. To carry both shadow and light without being consumed by either. To walk the earth as compassion with a spine. You are not broken. You are remade. And now it's your turn to speak. Drop a comment below if this found you in the fire. If you've survived the narcissist, if you've walked through betrayal and come out clearer, stronger, and sovereign. Say it with your chest. I see you, but I don't need you. Or I'm not healing to be liked. I'm healing to be free. Or I'm not broken. I've been remade. Because your voice, it's the spark. And someone else is waiting for your light to show them the way out. Let's burn the old stories to the ground and rise together.